It has been a long time coming for this video. I didn't realize that it actually have been 11 months since the last video in this series. For those who are not aware of what I'm talking about, feel free to refer to the description box below. But with that said,
supposed Bible contradiction. How many women went to the tomb? One of the most popular alleged contradictions is to point out each gospel says a different number of women went to the tomb on Sunday morning. Matthew says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. Mark says Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Luke says it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and additional women. And John only mentions Mary Magdalene. So all agree Mary Magdalene was there, but Matthew adds another Mary. Mark and Luke say this was Mary the mother of James, and Mark adds someone else named Salome, and Luke adds Joanna. So skeptics assert the Gospels are inconsistent and cannot.
so I'm not sure what is the language used. Is it exclusive, meaning that these are the only two, or they are just citing of two, or because some wording is actually quite precise in the meaning, right? Meaning that there are two person, for example, this and this, meaning the wording implying only two set of eyes that is there, while there can be different type of wording that he's there but it doesn't exclude someone else, right? So I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with this, and I to be honest, I haven't heard this particular contradiction been brought by anyone in any debate, so I'm not sure if this is something that people actually raise, especially Muslim. I have never heard they cited this before.
Not give us a clear picture of who was at the tomb on Sunday morning. However, in reality, skeptics are overplaying their hand. The issue can be sorted out by noting the ancient literary practice of spotlighting. First, it should be obvious, no gospel says only the women I have listed went to the tomb. Since they do not say this, the gospels do not necessarily contradict. Second, take the Gospel of John. It is true he says Mary went to the tomb, but in the very next verse, he reports that Mary said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." It is unlikely she is referring to herself as a royal plural, and more likely implies there were other women with her. So in reality, both John and Luke are open to there being additional women with Mary. The reason as to why John doesn't mention them has to do with the ancient literary practice called spotlighting. The scholar Mike Licona defines spotlighting as when an author focuses attention on a person so that the person's involvement in a scene is clearly described, whereas mention of others who were likewise involved is neglected. The author has shined his literary spotlight on that person. Think of a theatrical performance. During an act in which several are simultaneously on the stage, the lights go out and a spotlight shines on a particular actor. Others are present but are unseen. In literary spotlighting, the author only mentions one of the people present, but knows of the others. Licona highlights how spotlighting occurs in other ancient works. Specifically, he goes through the lives of Plutarch and compares how Plutarch alone writes each separate biography. Given that Plutarch is the only author of these biographies, we can see how he alone reports the same event in separate accounts. And quite often, Plutarch utilizes spotlighting when he talks about an event in one biography as compared to another. For example, in the life of Cicero, Crassus, Marcellus, and Metellus visit Cicero at night regarding an urgent matter. However, in life of Crassus, Plutarch doesn't mention the other two and spotlights Crassus as the one who goes to Cicero. Later in the life of Crassus, Marcellinus and Domitius ask Pompey and Crassus if they intend to run for consulship. But in life of Pompey, only Marcellinus is mentioned. In the life of Antony, Octavian, Hirtius, and Pansa were sent by the Senate to drive Antony out of Italy. But in life of Brutus, Octavius is spotlighted as the only one. Likewise in the Gospels, they were capable and allowed to employ the device of spotlighting. In John 19:25, he mentions the women standing at the cross, but he does not mention the disciple that Jesus loved as being there as well, even though in the next verse he references him. Luke employs spotlighting by only mentioning Peter running to the tomb, even though John says it was Peter and the beloved disciple. However, later in Luke, on the road to Emmaus, the other disciples say, "Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said," implying Luke is aware that Peter was not alone when he ran to the tomb. Therefore, when John only mentions Mary going to the tomb, he is probably just spotlighting her. Likewise, Matthew and Mark are probably doing the same thing, spotlighting only some of the women who went. This is not too different than the idea that I could tell you about my trip to Pittsburgh to visit family and omit that my wife and daughter went with me. But if my wife told the same story and mentioned that all three of us went, would our stories contradict? Of course not. We would recognize this as spotlighting. There is no rule that the gospel authors had to mention literally every person involved in every incident that happened with Jesus. Matthew is probably just mentioning the two he felt necessary to get the story across. Mark is probably doing the same, and John probably didn't feel it was necessary to write beyond Mary Magdalene's experience. So considering the ancient literary device of spotlighting, there is no contradiction here. No gospel says, let alone implies, only the women they mention were the ones who went to the tomb, and there is no rule stating they have to mention every woman involved. Also,
So when he say there's no rule, is there any rule exactly? Meaning, because this is literally, meaning the Bible is considered as literature, right? It's different than what Muslims see the Quran as, right? Or even the Hadith, because these are written by men, and they have their authorship and style, purpose, etc., etc., right? When the Quran is obviously very different than the Bible. It's considered the direct revelation. Hence, you cannot pick and choose. You cannot author. You cannot do anything. The Hadith also, meaning what exactly is the well, it depends, because certain hadiths, when the saying, for example, of the Prophet Muhammad SAW is being quoted, then it is quoted, while if someone says the meaning that the essence of what is said, but I'm relaying to you the meaning, the essence, hence it's quite clear in terms of the language. So going back here, is there, because the video stated that there's no rule to do that, but is there any rule at all, or there's no rule whatsoever? Hence, people saying they should be following a certain thing is just imposing something on the Bible that shouldn't be. Just curious.
Richard Bauckham suggests each gospel author only mention the specific women they did because they were careful to name only the women that were known to each author as a witness. If Mark was
What?
only the women that were known to each author as a witness.
So they name just the woman known to them as the witness. That's interesting, right? Let me
Suggest each gospel author only
each gospel author
mention the specific women they did because they were careful to name only the women that were known to each author as a witness.
Okay, so each author, meaning Matthew, the author of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only name the woman that they know as a witness, right? So meaning that perhaps the author of Matthew do not know Johanna, for example, or the author of John do not know Saloma, for example, right? Is that what it means? That is interesting because they name only people they know. My question is, do they name who convey the story to them, regardless of the detail of the story? Because of course I'm kind of imposing the standard of hadith on the Bible, which is not fair, right? Because the hadith is quite how to say, the Muslim with regard to the hadith is very careful in the sense that we have to safeguard, make sure everything that we consider as hadith, we know who narrate from who, until it actually reached Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Bible is different, right? Because it's just the author relaying a story that happened, and so here they just name the people, the woman that they know, if I understand the video's claim. But they need to state who told me the story? Because they definitely, the author is not there. They must heard from someone, right? So who did they heard it from? Who those source get it from? Because is it reach one of the women? I don't know. So that's just my curiosity. Of course, this is imposing the standard of hadith on Bible, right? So some Christian would say that's not fair, because the Bible do not even claim to be at the stature of hadith.
If Mark was unaware of Joanna, but Luke was aware of her from another source, Luke could feel safe mentioning her because he had independent verification from another source that was unavailable to Mark.
So from another source unavailable to Mark. So meaning that all of these authors have their own sources. Alright? But the sources are, maybe they keep it to themselves, I don't know. So the source for Mark might be this different from the source for John or Luke, and the sources cannot verify or validate whether that woman is there or not, right? Because it depends on who is the primary source that told them and how they told them, right? But that chain, again, I'm imposing the standard of hadith, right? But is there anywhere you can find the chain? Who is the author? Not who is the author of the Mark, meaning the author of Mark. Who did he get it from, etc., right? Is there any? Of course, to my knowledge, there's no such thing. You don't know, right?
If Matthew was aware of the Gospel of Mark, but could not verify Salome was present there within his own community, he may have simply taken the safe road and omitted her. This implies the Gospel.
So that is interesting, right? Because it is assuming the author. This is basically like, because from hadith perspective, what Bukhari, Muslim, etc., they have a benchmark on how they filter hadith to say that this is sahih, this is da'if, etc., right? So, but we know how it is being processed and classified, but we do not know, because this is assumption made about the authorship, right? But we do not know, right, the author, how does he filter the stories.
Authors may have been careful to include references to people they could only verify from witnesses or authoritative members of the church, instead of being careless in how they recorded things.
So they record things from some sources, and the gospel author may be careful to include reference to people they could verify from witnesses or authoritative member of church. So meaning that the source can be the church that safeguard the story, or some sources from the witness, but we can only speculate at this point, right? So this is all speculation.
Bauckham says, it is natural to suppose that these women were well known not just for having once told their stories, but as people who were made accessible and authoritative sources of these traditions as long as they lived. Which women were well known to each evangelist may have depended on the circles in which that evangelist collected traditions and the circles in which each woman moved during her lifetime. The differences among the gospel narratives of...
Now, this is interesting, because the way this video is being explained, it clearly indicates that all the authors of the gospel is secondary or tertiary, meaning in terms of level, they are definitely not the primary witness of any event. They are not even the secondary, right? Because the witness may be tell the church, etc. So they are further down the line, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, some Christian that communicate with me say that the author is actually quite a direct witness. But from what is being explained in this video, it seems that they are quite far away. Meaning, the way that this is described is basically similar to how from our perspective, right? Imam Bukhari or Imam Muslim, etc., want to safeguard the authenticity, but of course their standard is much higher because they have to pinpoint each individual by name. Here we don't know, right? But at least the story is kind of like that, meaning that they are like in the position of Al-Bukhari, for example, and okay, this is my way to make sure that, you know, it's as accurate as possible. So it's quite, you know, further apart from the narrative here.
Of the women's visit to the tomb may well reflect rather directly the different ways in which the story was told by the different women. The omission of Salome by both Matthew and Luke shows that the evangelists did not retain the names of women who had become obscure. Those named by each evangelist were, like their stories, still fresh in the memories of that evangelist's informants, if not the evangelist's own memory. Thus, there is no reason to suppose the Gospels contradict when they report the women as they do. They are more than likely employing the literary device of spotlighting and only mentioning those they felt they needed to get the story across. Or employing the...
But the whole narrative, initially the video said about spotlighting, and in the end spotlighting as well, but in the middle it's not about that, right? It's about quite because spotlighting is, if I'm understanding correctly, it's to spotlight what is relevant to the story, for example, to the narrative, to the lesson learned or whatever, right? But here is more of, I cannot verify whether that woman is there or that woman is quite obscure, etc., right? So it's totally different perspective.
This device because they were careful to only mention witnesses they could verify within their communities.
Okay, here I mean that spotlight is just highlighting those they feel is verified.
Thus, this supposed contradiction can be resolved.
Anyway, so yeah, that's it, and that's my reaction to it. I'm not familiar with this so-called contradiction, and I have never heard anyone brought this up. So that's why throughout I just follow through. But this the discussion there go into something that I'm more interested in the sense that how do the author actually gather all these stories, right? Can they verify, etc., right? So there you mean that they have to resort to certain approach, so that because okay that woman may not be verified, that woman, meaning that they have to do that, right? Because they are not the primary witness or primary source. Anyway, so that is interesting. Thank you for watching. See you next time.